Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into some breaking news today out of Philadelphia. A plane crash that's got everybody talking.
Yeah, it's a story that's still developing, of course, but we've got the basic details so far. A medical ambulance plane, it was a Learjet 55, went down near the Roosevelt Mall in Philadelphia. It had just taken off from Northeast Philadelphia Airport.
And it was headed to Missouri.
Yeah, Missouri, Springfield-Branson National Airport, to be exact.
6 people were on board, right?
Right, 6 people, 2 crew members, a young patient who was being transported for medical care, an escort, and the 2 pilots. Just a reminder that behind these headlines, there are real people whose lives are affected.
Yeah, you said it. It's a real tragedy. And the fact that it happened in a residential area, too.
That's right. That's what's really striking about this crash. The plane came down right in a neighborhood, and the impact started fires, spread to nearby homes and cars.
I read somewhere it was like 6 houses.
6 houses and 6 cars caught fire. Can you imagine being in that neighborhood, seeing this unfold right in front of you?
I can't even imagine. Total chaos.
Well, the first responders are there now, battling the fires, trying to secure the area. Mayor Sherrell Parker's already addressed the public, asking for prayers and telling people to stay away from the crash site. It's not safe right now.
Yeah, you've got jet fuel and all kinds of hazards to worry about.
Exactly.
It's amazing what those first responders do, rushing into a situation like that.
Real heroes.
So what happens now? I mean, is there already an investigation underway?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Multiple agencies are involved, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, the FAA, even the ATF.
ATF, really? Why are they involved in a plane crash?
Good question. It's probably because of the fires, the jet fuel, the risk of explosion. ATF's got the expertise in handling flammable materials and making sure the evidence collection is done safely in those kinds of situations.
Wow, so this is like a really complex investigation.
Very complex. It's not your typical plane crash investigation when it happens in the middle of a city like this.
And this isn't the only aviation incident making headlines lately, right? There was that collision just a few days ago, American Airlines plane and an Army helicopter.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Over by Reagan National Airport. Horrible accident, 67 people died.
It makes you wonder if there's any connection. Are we seeing a pattern here?
That's a question a lot of people are asking, for sure. And it's something investigators will have to look into as they dig deeper into both crashes.
Yeah, I mean, is it just a coincidence? Or is there something bigger going on? It's scary to think about.
Well, we don't want to jump to any conclusions, but it's understandable that people are concerned. And I think it's really important for there to be transparency in the investigative process. People need to know what happened and why.
Absolutely. We need answers. But at the same time, we have to remember this is more than just a news story. These are real people's lives we're talking about.
You're right. And, the company that operates the ambulance plane, they released a statement. They're expressing their concern for everyone involved, the patient's family, the crew, anybody on the ground who might have been affected.
It's a terrible situation all around.
And they're not releasing any names yet, out of respect for the families.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're going through so much right now. It's hard to even imagine.
It's heartbreaking.
As we learn more about this story, I think it's important to keep those families in mind. We need to be sensitive to their situation as we report on the developments. It's real tragedy, and we need to treat it with the respect it deserves. So, as we talk about this crash and how awful it is, one thing I always find fascinating is the investigation.
Yeah.
How do they even begin to piece together what happened in a situation like this?
Right. It's like a giant puzzle.
Exactly.
And this one is especially complex, with the crash happening in the middle of a neighborhood. But the NTSB, they're the experts. They lead the investigation, and they're incredibly thorough.
They handle pretty much all the major aviation accidents, don't they?
Yeah, pretty much. And their main goal is always to figure out what caused the crash and if there were any contributing factors. So they'll be looking at everything.
Everything. Like what?
Oh, the plane's maintenance records, the pilot's experience, the weather conditions at the time of the crash, any communication they had with air traffic control.
It must be like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle. You've got all these different pieces, and you have to figure out how they fit together.
Yeah, and then try to create a timeline, what happened leading up to the crash.
Right, right. And in this case, you've got the added complication of it being a medical ambulance flight.
You're right, I didn't even think about that. Those flights operate under different rules and procedures than a commercial airline.
I was reading about that. Yeah, they often have to make decisions really quickly, depending on the patient's condition and how urgent the transport is.
Exactly. So the NTSB will have to take that into account when they're looking at the data, interviewing witnesses, trying to understand the decisions that were made before the crash.
Oh, and there's the wreckage itself too, right?
Of course, gotta examine that closely, see if there are any signs of mechanical failure or anything like that.
I bet that's tough with the fires and the jet fuel. Must be a pretty chaotic scene.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but they have special teams trained to work in those conditions.
So they're going through the debris, documenting everything.
Everything. Every little piece of evidence, no matter how small.
Wow. And you said earlier the ATF is involved too. What exactly are they doing?
Right, well, they're the experts when it comes to flammable materials, so they'll be helping and investigate the fires, trying to figure out what caused them, how much damage there was.
So this is a huge team effort then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Lots of different agencies and experts working together.
How long do these investigations usually take? I mean, when can we expect to get some answers?
Well, it's not a quick process. It could be months, maybe even years before the NTSB releases their final report. These things take time.
I guess that makes sense. They want to be thorough, make sure they get it right.
Exactly.
It's just hard to wait when you're looking for answers.
Yeah.
Especially for the families of those involved.
I understand. It's tough. And while we wait for the official findings, there are still a lot of questions, right? Like, what does this tell us about the safety of medical transport flights in general? And are there any similarities to that collision by Reagan Airport?
Right. Could this happen again? Are there things we need to be doing differently to make air travel safer?
Those are the questions we all want answers to.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of unsettling when you think about it.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that even with all the technology and safety measures, flying is still risky.
And I think these incidents, as tragic as they are, force us to confront those risks. And hopefully they lead to some positive changes. We need to keep talking about aviation safety, make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent this from happening again.
It's tough to think about all the people affected by this. It's not just the people on the plane. It's their families, the people who live nearby, even the first responders.
You're right, it's a lot of people dealing with trauma and grief right now.
I just keep thinking about the families, you know.
Mm.
Losing a loved one like that is just unimaginable.
It is. And then you've got the people who witnessed the crash, the ones who live in the neighborhood. They're dealing with the shock of it all, the damage to their homes. And the first responders, they see this kind of thing all the time, but it still takes a toll.
Are there resources available for these people? Like, what kind of support can they get?
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of organizations that help victims of trauma and their families. The Red Cross, for example, they're usually right there on the scene offering assistance, connecting people with the resources they need.
And I imagine there are counselors and therapists who specialize in trauma too.
Right. There are mental health professionals who can provide support and help people work through the emotional impact of something like this.
It's important to remember that there's no right way to grieve. Everyone processes trauma differently.
Exactly. And it takes time. Healing doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. And, as we talked about before, the investigation itself is going to take a while. It could be a long time before we have any real answers about what happened.
That's true. And that uncertainty can be really hard for people who are looking for closure.
Yeah, I can only imagine. They just want to know why.
It's natural to want answers, but it's important to let the investigators do their job, make sure they're thorough.
I agree. Rushing the investigation won't do anyone any good.
But even as we wait for those answers, it's good to think about the bigger picture. What can we learn from this crash? Are there things we can do to prevent something like this from happening again?
I mean, anytime something like this happens, it makes you think twice about flying.
I get that. It's scary to think about. But, the more we talk about aviation safety, the better.
Maybe this crash, as awful as it was, will lead to some positive changes.
That's my hope. We have to learn from these tragedies.
Well, this has been a really heavy topic, but thanks for breaking it down for us.
Of course. Always happy to help.
It's important to talk about these things. And we'll definitely keep following this story and share any updates we get.
Sounds good.
That's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you next time.